3 years after her husband's death, Ava Quinn lived in silence, a silence made of unanswered questions, folded flags, and dreams that never came back. Until a dog appeared. Soaked by storm, scarred by something deeper than wounds, he stood at her gate. He didn't bark, didn't approach. He waited. And when he returned, it wasn't alone. Wrapped in a faded piece of uniform, a trembling puppy, and a badge that should have been buried with the dead. That night, the rain returned. So did the ghosts, and the questions. Why this dog? Why now? What if her husband hadn't just died? What if someone or something was still carrying the truth? And what if it had 4 legs? And a name? It had been raining all day. Not the kind that thundered or struck hard against the roof, but the quiet kind, the kind that whispered instead of shouted. Each drop slid down the kitchen window like a sigh, soft and resigned. It was the sort of rain that didn't flood or storm. It simply lingered, like something too heartbroken to leave. Inside the small, cedar-shingled cottage tucked on the edge of New Hampshire's Black River pines, Ava Quinn sat at the kitchen table. Her fingers rested loosely around a chipped ceramic mug, lukewarm tea long forgotten. She wasn't reading. She wasn't writing. She was just there, half in the room, half somewhere else. The lamp above her flickered softly, casting a halo of pale light that brushed the edges of the bookshelf, the refrigerator, the old pair of boots still sitting by the door, Gabriel's boots, untouched, since the day she'd come home from the hospital without him. 3 years. It had been 3 whole years since the accident. One turn too sharp on a rain-slick road. The official report had been clean, sterile. Single vehicle incident. Weather-related. No foul play. But no sentence in that file could explain why she still sometimes waited for the sound of his key in the door, or why she hadn't thrown out his half-empty bottle of shaving cream in the cabinet. Gabriel Quinn had been a canine officer, a man of habit and quiet strength. He never raised his voice, not even when angry. And he never went on patrol without saying goodbye, not with words, but with a glance over the shoulder. That had always been enough. That glance said everything. Wait for me. And Ava had waited. Every evening, every storm, until the day she stopped waiting, because waiting had nowhere to land anymore. The rain ticked gently on the porch roof, and Ava rose, walking to the window with a slowness that came not from age, but from carrying something heavy for too long. She rubbed the glass with her sleeve. The yard beyond was awash of green and silver-wet pine needles, moss-laced stone, and the black iron gate that framed the edge of her world. Then she saw it. At first it looked like part of the shadows, some blend of tree bark and stone and fog. But then it moved, just slightly, just enough to pull itself out of the rain's monotony. A shape, a form, a dog. No, not just a dog. A German shepherd, large and broad-shouldered, fur darkened by rain, standing utterly still outside the gate, head up, ears high, eyes fixed forward like he was guarding something, or waiting. Ava didn't move. She barely breathed. He wasn't scratching to get in. He wasn't whining. He didn't even pace. He just stood there, as if carved from silence itself. She stepped back from the window, her heart beginning to pulse in places that hadn't stirred in years. Some old, forgotten instinct made her reach for Gabriel's raincoat hanging behind the door. But her fingers stopped short. Why would she go out? She didn't know this animal. He might be lost, or worse, wounded. But something about him didn't look lost. He looked intentional. Still, she stayed inside. She didn't open the door. She just stood by the threshold, watching as the dog turned his head slightly toward the porch, toward her, and locked eyes with her through the drizzle. And for a second, a blink, maybe less, she could have sworn he saw her. Not just with his eyes, but with memory. Like he knew this place, like he had been here before. The clock ticked. The mug on the table cooled. The dog didn't move. Finally, Ava stepped back. She exhaled softly and drew the curtain closed, not out of dismissal, but self-preservation. She didn't have room for hope. Not anymore. But she didn't go to bed either. She sat on the couch, lights off, rain folding over the roof like a lullaby. She left the porch light on, not because she expected anything to change, but because somehow she needed it to stay on. The next morning she rose early. Habit, not purpose. The rain had stopped, but the world was still damp grass heavy, stones slick, tree trunks dark with soaked bark. She padded barefoot to the porch, rubbed sleep from her eyes, and glanced toward the gate. Gone. The yard stood quiet. No movement, no sound. And yet, just before she turned away, her gaze dropped to the path near the front step, and caught on something small, dark, and precise. A paw print pressed into the thin layer of mud, deep, defined, left behind on purpose, it seemed, as if to say, "I was here." Ava crouched down, fingers brushing just short of touching it. Then she whispered to the air, as if the trees might carry it to whoever needed to hear it. "Who sent you?" No answer came, only a breeze through the pine branches. But something had changed. There was no bark, no leash, no noise. But something unseen had entered the stillness of her life, and it had eyes. Ava didn't sleep that night. She didn't stay up because she was afraid, or because she believed the dog would return. She stayed up because she couldn't quite bring herself to forget the way he had looked at her. That gaze, silent, solid, not pleading but present, had done something to the inside of her, like a finger pressed gently on the surface of still water. Barely a ripple, but enough to ruin the illusion of calm. She moved through the hours in fragments. A teacup rinsed and forgotten in the sink. An old song humming low on the radio, one Gabriel used to tap his fingers to. She didn't light a candle, didn't fold the laundry. She just lingered, between rooms, between thoughts, between before and whatever might come next. Every once in a while she would drift toward the kitchen window and part the curtain, just enough to glance down the drive. But the rain had thickened. It blurred the glass like fogged breath and swallowed the world in slow-motion silver. The dog didn't return. Or maybe he was still there, somewhere in the woods, watching, waiting. That thought crept up her spine not as fear, but as a strange kind of comfort, as if someone had stepped back into her orbit, not close enough to touch, just enough to be felt. By 3 a.m., the rain softened. It didn't stop. It simply thinned out, like someone whispering a lullaby into silence. Ava finally lay on the couch. Not to sleep, not exactly, but to rest near the window. The curtain drawn half open, the porch light still glowing like a promise no one had made. When morning came, it came slowly. Light crept into the sky like a tide, unsure whether to rise. The clouds hadn't lifted. The air still smelled of pine and soil, and something older like memory. Ava pulled a cardigan over her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked softly beneath her feet, their sound oddly reassuring. The yard was empty. No movement, no sound. just the gentle dripping of rain from the eaves and the distant chirp of a brave bird trying to reclaim the morning. She scanned the tree line, the gravel drive, the edge of the woods. Nothing. She should have expected that. She had, really. But disappointment still brushed her chest like the chill of damp wind. She was about to turn back inside when she paused, eyes drawn downward. There, on the edge of the stone path, pressed clean into the soft mud, was a single paw print. Deep, clear, heavy enough to hold meaning, alone, but not accidental. Ava crouched beside it, one hand drifting down, stopping just short of touching the earth. The print was large, well-formed. It hadn't been made in haste. No scrambling, no panic. Just one step, one statement. He had been there. Not begging, not barking. Just present, like a shadow given shape, like someone who knew how to wait. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers curling slightly above the soil, her breath held in her throat. Then, without thinking, she whispered, not to herself, not to the sky, but to the print. "Who sent you?" The question didn't echo. It didn't demand an answer. It just hung there, quiet, honest, and something about saying it aloud, those 4 simple words, made her feel like she'd just cracked the door to a room she hadn't entered since Gabriel's funeral. A breeze swept through the pines behind the fence, rustling leaves that had clung to branches longer than they should. The scent of wet bark drifted past her. She closed her eyes, just for a second, and listened, not for footsteps, not for growls, but for something older, something that had waited too long in silence. When she rose, she didn't wipe the mud from her knees. She didn't cover the paw print either. Instead, she left the porch light on, even as the daylight brightened. She told herself it was habit, but somewhere deeper, deeper than she wanted to admit, it felt like invitation, not to come in, but to return. The second night came with no warning, no dramatic thunder, no storm on the horizon, just a deep hush settling over the woods, too quiet to trust, too still to ignore. Ava had left the porch light on again. She told herself it was habit, but deep down she knew it was a form of waiting, a soft call to something she didn't yet understand. And so she moved through the evening as if walking underwater, slow, cautious, her mind drifting back to the print in the mud and the gaze that hadn't asked anything, only observed. She was halfway through reheating a bowl of lentil stew when something pulled her eyes to the window. No sound, no bark, just presence. She stepped to the glass. There, just beyond the gate, in the very spot where he had stood before, was the dog. Him. Again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Ava opened the front door slowly, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. The porch light cast a soft amber glow, stretching toward the edge of the yard where the dog stood, soaked and silent. His fur hung heavy with rain, his eyes locked on her like he hadn't moved since the day before. At his feet was a bundle small, uneven, wrapped in something dark. She stepped forward, one hand gripping the railing, her voice lost somewhere in the back of her mouth. The dog didn't move. She knelt slowly. The rain had started again, light but insistent. It gathered on the wood, ran down her sleeves, but she didn't notice. Her attention narrowed to that bundle. The fabric wrapping it was navy blue, frayed at the edges and instantly familiar. Police uniform. Not the kind mass-produced for ceremony or PR. This was field-worn, weathered. The kind Gabriel used to toss on the back of a kitchen chair, the faint smell of sweat and pine still clinging to the sleeves. Her hands shook as she reached for it. The bundle shifted slightly under her touch, something alive inside. A tiny shiver, almost imperceptible, like breath in the cold. Ava pulled the fabric open slowly, and there it was, a pup, no more than a few weeks old. German shepherd by the shape of the muzzle, the coloring on its back. Its fur was matted from the rain, trembling with exhaustion, but it was breathing. Its head was tucked tight against the larger dog's front leg, as if clinging to the last warmth the world had to offer. Ava's heart clenched. Then she saw something else. Tucked into the fold of the uniform fabric, nearly missed, just under the pup's damp paw, was a badge. Metal, worn, dulled by time and moisture. But the number was still visible. The lettering still intact. D. Callan, New Hampshire State Police. Unit K9. Ava's knees gave out. She sank slowly to the porch, the rain pattering against her skin as she clutched the badge in her hand. D. Callan, Daniel. Gabriel's best friend. The one who had vanished 5 years ago during a classified operation. No body. No closure. Just a line on a page and a tone in the captain's voice that said, "Don't ask." But here it was, in her hand, brought not by a courier, not by a person, but by a dog. The shepherd stood still, unmoving, unmoved, watching her, his gaze not demanding, not desperate, just full, as if he had waited years to deliver this moment. Ava looked up at him, her voice caught between disbelief and awe. "Where did you come from?" she whispered. "Why, now?" The dog said nothing, of course. But in his silence something stirred, something heavy, layered and aching. She glanced down at the pup, now curled tighter, still tucked against the larger dog's side. Its eyes remained closed, but it breathed, it survived. And something about that, the survival, the choice to bring life to her doorstep, wrapped in memory, broke something loose inside her. Not pain, not grief, something older. Something buried beneath years of trying to be still. Ava pressed the badge to her chest. It was cold, solid, real. The shepherd took one step forward, not onto the porch, just to the edge. Then he sat, posture tall, ears forward, eyes steady, as if waiting not for permission, but recognition. She met his eyes again, and this time she didn't look away. "You brought him back," she said softly, her voice cracking like splintered wood. "You brought him home." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone on that porch. Not in the rain, not in the silence, not in the grief. Because something had returned. Not Gabriel, not Daniel, but something they left behind. And it had 4 legs, steady eyes, and a mission that hadn't ended when theirs did. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't the hollow, unending stillness that had lived with Ava since Gabriel's death. No, it was watchful now, weighted, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ava stood at the kitchen sink, steam rising in gentle coils from a basin of warm water. The fabric she was washing, slowly, carefully, was soaked through, its dark navy fibers still clinging to the scent of rain and something else beneath it, the faint trace of earth and time. The uniform cloth was heavier than it looked, torn at the edges, faded in parts, but the stitching remained deliberate and unmistakable. A name had once been pressed into the chest pocket. That patch was gone now, frayed away or removed. But just below it, half hidden in the crease of the shoulder, Ava saw the glint of embroidery thread, a patch she recognized instantly, a golden triangle, its lines softened by weather, bordered with black thread, and inside it, the worn initials, NRK 9. She exhaled sharply. Gabriel's unit. The same insignia she had once sewn back onto his jacket when it began to peel from years of use. The same logo stitched onto the photo still framed above the hallway bookshelf, the one taken after his first year with the division. 5 men, 3 dogs, all standing in front of an armored cruiser under the autumn sun. Gabriel had been smiling, but it was Daniel Callan who had his arm thrown casually over Gabriel's shoulder, his canine partner sitting alert by his boots. Ava stopped scrubbing the photo. She left the sink, water still dripping from her sleeves, and walked down the hallway. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate. She lifted the frame from the wall and brought it into the light. She stared at it for a long time. There it was, the uniform Daniel had worn. The same sharp crease along the sleeve, the same dusting of dried mud along the pant hem, the same patch on his shoulder. She turned back to the fabric lying on the counter. It was his. It had to be. Ava's throat tightened as she returned to the bundle, now gently unwrapped and laid across a folded towel. The puppy still nameless slept, curled tightly in a coil of soaked fur. Its breathing was shallow, steady. One small paw twitched in sleep. She reached out, brushing a thumb lightly across its damp back, her fingers trembling. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 weeks old. "What did they leave you with, little one?" she whispered, voice thick. The weight of the police badge still sat on the kitchen table, its engraved lettering now cleaned, polished gently with the edge of a dishcloth. It gleamed softly under the amber light. The number, the name, D. Callan. She picked it up again, held it between her palms like a relic, as if it might speak. Daniel hadn't had any family she knew of. Just the department. Just the job. He had lived out of a go-bag most of the time, never stayed in one place long enough to leave roots. But he had loved that damn dog of his. Ranger, if she remembered right. Big, fast, mouthy. Smart in a way that made the handlers nervous. And then gone. One day, an assignment. The next, silence. Headquarters gave her and Gabriel the line they gave everyone. Callan went missing during a restricted op. No recovery possible. No funeral. No explanation. No answers. Just a fold in history where a man used to be. Ava swallowed hard. Her fingers clenched around the badge until the edge dug into her palm. She looked toward the front door. The shepherd still out there, just beyond the porch. He hadn't moved since bringing the pup, hadn't barked, hadn't begged to come in. He simply sat there, watching, guarding, almost like he was waiting for her to put the pieces together. Ava returned to the sink and lifted the now damp uniform cloth. She spread it gently across the counter to dry. And as she did, she noticed something she had missed before. Inside one of the inner folds, hidden like a forgotten corner of a pocket, was a number, stenciled faintly in ink, nearly washed away. OP-17, Ghost. The moment she read it, her breath caught. Ghost protocols. She remembered the term from one of Gabriel's late-night rants. A program, he had said, half whisper, half warning. A system for embedding intel inside handlers, sometimes inside dogs. Missions so classified, even the ones sent on them couldn't access the full directive. Designed for one-way retrieval. If you didn't come back, no one looked, because the system never wanted to remember you. Ava stared at the faded ink. She could feel something shifting inside her, something loosening. This wasn't just a stray dog. This wasn't just a rescued pup. This was the residue of something buried, a whisper carried on 4 legs, wrapped in the last remaining threads of a forgotten name. And Daniel Callan hadn't vanished. He had been sent away with a message, one Ava had just started to receive. By late afternoon the rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy thick with that post-storm quiet that settles not only in the trees, but in the bones. Ava left the front door slightly ajar, just enough to see him. The shepherd was still there, not resting, not pacing, just seated at the edge of the porch like some old soldier standing guard. He didn't whimper, didn't fidget. His eyes followed every movement she made inside the house, but never with intrusion, more like reassurance. He was not waiting to be let in. He was waiting to make sure nothing else got through. And Ava somehow understood that. She moved through the house quietly. The pup now, clean, dry, and bundled in a fleece towel, slept soundly in a woven basket beside the fireplace. Its tiny breaths rose and fell against the fabric like clockwork. The shepherd didn't seem to rest at all. When the wind picked up, rattling the pine branches above the roof, he stood without sound and scanned the horizon. When a car passed in the far-off road, he lowered his head slightly, eyes narrowed, tail still. When the sun began to fall behind the tree line, painting the porch in copper light, he adjusted his position 1 step left, closer to the door, but never past it. Ava watched it all unfold from behind the window pane, quietly, curiously. He didn't move like a stray. He didn't act lost. He acted like he belonged here, not as a pet, as a guardian. And as the sky darkened to indigo, she felt a word rising in her chest. A name not plucked from memory, not inherited, but offered, whole and fitting. She stepped outside with a folded blanket, her feet bare against the porch wood. The dog turned his head as she approached, calm, unflinching. Ava knelt a few feet away, holding out the blanket but not pushing it forward. "You're not his dog," she said softly, her voice almost carried off by the wind. "You're something else." She glanced toward the trees, then back at him. "You watched over him, didn't you?" she whispered. "And when he didn't come back, you found someone else to protect." The shepherd blinked slowly, the way some dogs do when they're not afraid, but aware, listening. Ava laid the blanket down beside him, not over him, not against him, just beside. He didn't move. She sat for a while, elbows resting on her knees. "You stood still," she murmured. "You waited." She looked at him not as something lost, but as something left behind with purpose. Not just a courier, not just a survivor, something deliberate. And then she said it, not expecting him to react, but needing to name what had taken root in her heart. "Sentinel." The dog's ear flicked at the sound, subtle, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. She smiled, faint but genuine. "That's what you are, isn't it?" He didn't confirm. He didn't need to. That night she left the front door unlocked. Not open, not wide, just unlocked. She made tea, curled into Gabriel's old armchair, with the pup resting at her side, and let the silence stretch long. Somewhere around midnight she finally drifted off. And when she dreamed, it wasn't the jagged dreams that usually came, the ones with empty rooms and fading voices. This time, it was different. She stood in the woods, those same woods behind her house, and there was a light between the trees. Warm, familiar. Someone walked through it. A silhouette, shoulders she knew, a stride she could never forget. Gabriel. He didn't speak at first, just stood beneath the pine canopy, the wind stirring his jacket like breath. And then, without moving his lips, she heard it. Not a memory, not a hallucination, but something deeper. He remembers what I couldn't. Ava tried to speak, tried to run forward, but the dream wasn't made for movement. It was made for message. The trees closed around him again, the light dimming. And before it all vanished, Gabriel turned one last time, just enough to nod. Not to her, but to the shadow beside her. She looked down. Sentinel. Awake, unmoving, his eyes glowing faint in the dream light. Watching. Always watching. Ava woke with a gasp, heart pounding. The house was still. The fire had gone low. She glanced toward the door. It remained closed, but outside the window, Sentinel still sat in his spot, his head turned slightly toward her, like he knew. The storm had passed, but the clouds still hung low over the hills, thick, unmoving, as if the sky itself hadn't yet decided what to do next. Ava crouched at the edge of the porch in the soft, pale light of morning, a blanket draped over her shoulders, and a bowl of warm broth cooling beside her. Sentinel sat just a few feet away, one hind leg outstretched, the other curled slightly in a way that caught her attention. Not limping exactly, but favoring, subtle, controlled, like he was used to hiding pain. "Let me see," she said softly, crouching forward. She didn't expect him to comply. But Sentinel didn't move away. He watched her carefully as she reached down, hands slow and open. He shifted his weight just enough for her to gently run her fingers down his flank, toward the thick fur near his rear thigh. And there, just above the curve of muscle, she felt it. Not scar tissue, not an injury. A knot, tightly wound, compact. Gray fabric twisted and sewn into the fur with unnatural precision. Ava's breath caught. She gently pressed around it. Sentinel didn't flinch. She reached for her pocket knife and whispered, "Easy, boy." Then cut. The fabric resisted, industrial grade, some kind of tactical binding thread. It unraveled like a coiled secret, layers folding back until something small and hard dropped into her palm with a quiet clink. A USB drive. Black. Sleek. No label. But on one side, a faint marking. HLD K9092. Ava stared at it, blood rushing in her ears. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She stood, crossed into the house, and didn't even bother to brush the dirt from her knees. Gabriel's old laptop sat in a dusted leather case beneath the bookshelf. She hadn't touched it in over a year. She opened it slowly. The system booted slower than she remembered, the fan wheezing like an aging breath. She plugged the USB into the side port and waited. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the screen flickered once. A single folder appeared. RH077. Final message. Ava hesitated. Just a second. Then she double-clicked. The screen went black, then lit with a grainy video feed. Low resolution. Timestamp blinking erratically in the corner. The image stabilized enough to reveal a man, haggard, unshaven, wearing a torn tactical vest and a bandage across one shoulder. Daniel Callan, alive. Or at least, he had been. He sat against what looked like the wall of a cave or bunker light filtering in from a small hole above. Dirt smudged his face. His eyes looked straight into the lens, but it was clear he was speaking not just to a camera. He was speaking to her. "If this made it to you," he began, voice raw, cracking, "then that means he found you." Ava leaned forward, barely breathing. "I don't know your name," Callan continued, "but if you knew Gabriel, if you were part of his life, then you deserve the truth. And Sentinel Row 77, he's the only one left who remembers it all." His hand moved into frame. He placed it gently on the head of the same German shepherd now lying just outside Ava's door. He was programmed to forget, but he didn't. That's what makes him dangerous. Callan looked off camera for a second, a distant sound. Then he focused again. There was a program, Blackhold. We were told it was off-grid recon dogs trained to store encrypted data, not just in chips but in association, memory sequences embedded in trauma patterns, sight, smell, grief. We were the handlers, but we weren't supposed to survive. A pause. His eyes darkened. "Gabriel figured it out. He tried to pull us out. That's why he died." Ava's hand flew to her mouth. Callan's voice broke. "I tried to keep Row 77 out, but I had to embed something inside him. I had to, or all of this would vanish." He coughed. Blood streaked the corner of his mouth. "If he found you, it means the message got through. But be careful. They'll come for him. For you." His eyes locked onto the camera again, softer now. "Don't let them bury this. He's not just a dog. He's the last archive." The video cut out. Silence. Ava stared at the screen. Her reflection ghosted across the black monitor, lips parted, breath shallow. Outside, Sentinel hadn't moved. But somehow, the world had. The video restarted on its own. No menu, no pause. Just Callan's eyes sharp, despite the grime, flickering as the dim light source behind him shifted. His face was leaner than in the old photos Ava had seen, a man eroded by something more brutal than time. The quiet hum of static buzzed beneath his voice, like the tape was barely holding together. "I don't know how long I have," he began again, his tone more urgent now. "Or even if this will make it to you. If you're watching this, it means Row 77 Sentinel he remembered. He brought it home." Ava sat on the edge of the couch, the laptop balanced on her knees, her breath slow and shallow. Callan looked off-screen briefly, then back. "I need you to understand something. Not everything we were told was true." His hand came into view again. Gently resting on Sentinel, though, he called him something else now. "K9, Row 77. That's his designation. First-gen memory carrier. A biological vault." Ava's fingers tightened around the couch cushion. "Blackhold wasn't just an operation," he continued. "It was a program designed to weaponize memory itself. Dogs weren't just trackers or scouts. They were made into recorders. Things too sensitive to store digitally were encoded in them. Experiences, images, sound frequencies, even handler pain reactions. Everything went through them. Everything stayed in them." He paused, his voice hitching. "And then they tried to wipe them, one by one." Sentinel outside the window remained still. His ears flicked once. Ava wondered, could he hear it too? Callan leaned closer in the video. Shadows danced under his cheekbones. "I don't know if Gabriel ever told you about North Marrow, about the 5th trial. He wasn't supposed to be there. None of us were. It was a cleanup mission, but the mess wasn't theirs. It was ours. They used us to erase the evidence. Ava blinked hard. Her mind reached for something, some thread Gabriel had once tried to speak, but never managed to untangle. Late-night silences, the tremor in his hand when watching K9 memorials, the way he never talked about his last mission, not even when she begged. Callan exhaled in the video. It was rough, labored. He looked sick. They told us it was classified, said we couldn't bring the dogs back. But Gabe knew. He knew they weren't just assets. They were witnesses. He hesitated, eyes damp now. When he spoke again, the words cracked. "I'm sorry for what happened to him. I tried to stop it, but I was already compromised." Ava's throat tightened. Her vision blurred. He wasn't a coward. He didn't break protocol. He was silenced. A long pause. Then, slowly, Callan reached toward the camera, as if reaching through time. "If Row 77 brought this to you, then he remembers, which means it's not over." A beat. "You can still end it." The screen flickered. Static overtook his face. Just before it faded to black, one last phrase passed his lips, barely audible. "Help him remember what they want erased." Then silence. Ava sat frozen. The room felt colder now, or maybe just emptier. Outside, Sentinel finally rose to his feet. He looked at the door, not at her, but at the threshold itself, as if something had shifted, as if his memory had just stirred to life again. Ava whispered, voice trembling, "What did they do to you?" No answer. Just the rustle of trees and the faint echo of a message long buried, and a dead man's final plea, "Help him remember." It had taken Ava 3 hours to find a number that still worked, and another 6 to convince herself to dial it. Marin Reyes didn't have a social media presence, no LinkedIn, no public records past 2018. The only remnant of her career was a forgotten article buried in an archived law enforcement review, praising her inconvenient integrity as the youngest internal affairs investigator ever assigned to joint military-police crossovers. The article didn't mention that she was quietly removed 6 months after questioning the aftermath of Operation North Marrow. It didn't say her badge was taken, or that her silence was bought with the kind of threat that doesn't leave paper trails. But Gabriel had spoken her name once, drunk, bone-weary, 3 weeks before he died. She was the only one who asked the right questions. That was enough. Ava made the call, and Marin answered on the 3rd ring with a voice like gravel and rain. "Who gave you this number?" Ava hesitated, then said, "Gabriel Quinn. I'm his wife." Silence. Then a quiet exhale. "I'm listening." The knock came just after dusk. 3 short raps. A pause. Then 2. Not police. Not military. Just someone who'd been trained to make sure she was heard before she was seen. Ava opened the door. Marin Reyes stood under the porch light, her coat wet from the road, her expression unreadable. Mid-40s, hair pulled back into a practical knot, the scar under her right cheekbone catching the light like a faded war medal. Behind her, Sentinel emerged from the shadows. Marin's breath hitched the moment she saw him. "Row 77?" she murmured. Her voice didn't hold surprise, only the quiet gravity of recognition. He made it. Sentinel didn't bark, didn't move, but he stepped forward and looked up at her, as if confirming an identity without needing words. Marin knelt. Her hand hovered over his head, hesitant, reverent. "They told me he died at the border, that he went feral." She looked up at Ava, and for the first time her voice broke. "They lied to me, too." Ava nodded and stepped aside. "Come in." The kitchen hadn't been this alive in years. Steam from black coffee, the low hum of the space heater, Sentinel lying between them like a silent witness. Ava slid the laptop across the table. Marin scanned the folder labels. Her eyes stopped on the file. RH-077. Final message. "Callan," she whispered. "You knew him?" Ava asked. Marin took a long sip of coffee, then nodded. "He was Gabriel's closest friend. I didn't know him well, but I knew his case. Everyone did. Vanished mid-mission. Declared MIA. No investigation." "Why not?" Marin looked her dead in the eye. "Because Blackhold classified everything within 6 hours. His unit logs were sealed, and anyone who asked questions disappeared." Ava opened the video. Let it play. She watched Marin's face as Callan spoke. No reaction, no interruption, just stillness, like a dam holding back a flood. When the video ended, Marin leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "They used the dogs to smuggle intel. That was the theory." She looked at Sentinel again, this time not with sympathy but awe. "He's the last. The others were dismantled. Quietly. Strategically. Why? Because they saw too much." The silence between them was thick. Ava asked softly, "What do we do?" Marin didn't answer right away. She looked at Sentinel, his body scarred, his eyes unblinking. Then she said, "We open the vault." They waited until midnight. Not because the data required it, but because something about the dark made truth feel less blinding, easier to look at when the rest of the world had turned away. Marin sat hunched over Gabriel's old laptop, her jacket draped on the back of the chair, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Ava watched from across the table, arms folded tightly, her gaze flickering between the blinking cursor and Sentinel, who lay silent in the doorway. His ears twitched occasionally, alert but unmoving. He was watching the past unfold. The USB had required 3 different bypass protocols. Gabriel had left back doors in the system, breadcrumbs only someone who knew him could follow. The files weren't just encrypted, they were layered, as if Callan and Gabriel had anticipated a need to protect not just what they discovered, but who would find it. Marin cracked the final layer. Dozens of folders populated the screen. Ava leaned closer. Each file was named with strings of military shorthand. BHK-9 Act Log, RH-077 Field, TSK, MySRPT colon zip. And one stood out, titled simply, Final Chain. Marin clicked it. A stream of black and white mission logs flooded the screen. No headers, no unit identifiers. Just raw data, time-stamped operations, handler observations, vitals synced to K9 units. Some entries were so short, they read like thoughts caught mid-breath. Fate 42-18. Unit RH-077 tracked unknown target 12 kilometers SE. No human recon present. Subject unverified. Alert state. Heightened. 6:03:44. Handler refused shutdown order. Provisional override triggered. 6:45:03. GPS signal failure. Memory vault protocol initiated. 7:01. 19. Last transmission. North Marrow Trail. Marin's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "What is this?" Ava asked, barely above a whisper. "Proof," Marin muttered, "of something they wanted erased." She pulled up the embedded coordinates and launched a satellite map overlay. The screen zoomed in slowly, a dense stretch of forest, narrow trails, no service roads. And there, highlighted in flickering red, was the final ping. North Marrow Trail. Marin zoomed again, adjusting the opacity of the terrain. Her brows tightened. "There's no known crash here, no report. Not even flagged as a restricted area." "But this was where Callan last transmitted," Ava said. Marin nodded, face grim. "And where Sentinel went dark for 42 hours, until he reappeared 3 years later, at your front gate." Ava stared at the map. The trees looked peaceful from this altitude, gentle, green, deceiving. Why didn't they search it? Marin's voice dropped. Because the people who should have searched were the ones who buried it. She tapped the log again. A subfolder opened, revealing fragmented audio files. Static-filled voices. Barking. Someone yelling, "Callan, pull him back! Pull him back!" Then silence. Then a scream. Ava closed her eyes. It was Gabriel's voice. She'd know it anywhere. Raw. Panicked. Not like a soldier, but like a man watching something he couldn't stop. She opened her eyes. They shimmered, but she didn't blink. "They let it happen." Marin said nothing. She didn't have to. Ava pushed back from the table, walked to the doorway where Sentinel lay. She knelt beside him, fingers trembling as she touched the thick fur along his neck. "You carried all of this? For 5 years?" Sentinel didn't look at her, but his head lowered slightly, just enough to rest against her knee. Not apology, not regret, just truth. And a burden finally shared. Marin stood behind them. "We leave before dawn. We follow the trail. North Marrow's not on any map anymore, but he remembers the way." Ava looked back toward the laptop. The logs. The echoes of war still trapped in binary code. She whispered, "Then we go." Outside, the wind picked up through the trees, rustling the pines like voices calling from the earth. Voices that had waited long enough. They departed before the world had fully decided to wake. Ava tightened the drawstrings of her worn canvas bag as the first thread of light cut across the tree line. The forest loomed ahead, dense, silent, cloaked in mist. Not the kind of trail that showed up on tourist maps. This was older, rougher. The kind of path that remembered who'd walked it and who hadn't come back. Sentinel stood at the edge of the clearing, nose to the air, body still. His fur had caught dew overnight, the silver along his muzzle glistening faintly like frost. But his eyes were sharp, watching, calculating, remembering. Ava adjusted the pup inside the bag. Scout nestled against her back with surprising calm, not restless, not frightened, but aware, like he could feel the tension coiled in every breath his older counterpart took. "He knows this place," Marin murmured from behind them. "More than we do," Ava answered. They didn't need to say it, but they all felt it. This wasn't a walk. It was a return. A memory walked in reverse. And Sentinel was retracing something he'd never wanted to revisit. The trail began narrow, just a ghost of a line underfoot, barely marked by age-softened prints and fractured pine needles. Trees leaned in close, branches knotted above like old hands trying to hide the sky. Every few meters, Sentinel would pause. He wouldn't bark or whine, just stop, nose low, tail still, ears tilting ever so slightly as if tuning into frequencies no one else could hear. Once, he stepped off the path and approached a cluster of moss-covered stones. He circled twice, then pressed his nose gently to the ground. Ava watched him. "Something happened here," she whispered. Marin pulled a small recorder from her pocket and clicked it on. No visible markers, but he remembers. They moved on. The forest thickened. Roots snagged their boots. The silence grew heavier. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. Scout let out a faint huff from inside the pack. Ava reached back and touched his head. "You okay, little one?" The pup nuzzled her hand, then turned his eyes outward toward Sentinel, as if saying, "I'm following him too." Hours passed like pages turning in a book no one had written, just read in reverse. At one point they reached a fork in the trail. Both paths looked the same, overgrown, untouched. Sentinel didn't hesitate. He took the left. But before crossing, he paused and looked back at Ava. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. Ava stepped forward. She placed her hand gently on his back, just between his shoulders, the way Gabriel used to when giving reassurance without command. "You're not alone this time," she said softly. Sentinel leaned into the touch for half a second, then turned and kept walking. Midway through the 4th hour, the terrain changed. The trees opened up just enough to let sunlight bleed through, casting uneven gold across the forest floor. But instead of feeling warm, it felt watched. Ahead, Sentinel slowed again, this time crouching slightly. He nosed beneath a tangle of branches and dug with quiet urgency. A small, rusted fragment surfaced. A bolt, still threaded, still slick with something that didn't feel like rust. Marin picked it up with a tissue. Military issue. Part of a crate or canister. Ava stared at the impression in the earth. The dirt was compacted in a way only weight and time could explain. "They camped here," she said. "No," Marin corrected gently. "They hid here." By noon, their packs were lighter, but the air had grown heavier. Scout whimpered once. Not from fear, but from sensing something just beyond the trail. A shift in the ground. A story still waiting to be told. Sentinel stopped again. His body froze. Then he turned his head and looked into the trees. Ava followed his gaze. There, barely visible, was an old ranger marker collapsed, split diagonally, half swallowed by the undergrowth. Moss clung to its base like time refusing to let go. Marin brushed it off, revealing faint stenciled letters. NMT, Sector 9. Ava exhaled sharply. North Marrow Trail. They'd found it. But it didn't feel like a destination. It felt like an echo. And Sentinel, standing beside it, didn't wag or bark. He simply stood guard, like he had 3 years ago, when he never should have come back. The forest held its breath. Not a branch creaked. Not a single bird called. Only the faint rustle of wind threading through pine needles, soft, like something trying not to be heard. Sentinel stood still beside the broken ranger marker, his gaze locked on the exposed roots crawling over the earth like arthritic fingers. He didn't sniff. He didn't dig. He simply looked. And then he stepped back. Ava knelt, brushing away the layer of moss clinging to the wood. The marker had once stood tall, painted with faded red stripes. Now it leaned, cracked, half consumed by the forest's slow forgetting. Marin crouched beside her, pulling a small folding spade from her pack. She didn't ask Sentinel for permission. She dug. Beneath the first few inches of soil, the smell changed. Damp wood gave way to something metallic, something once touched by fire and time. A soft clink echoed as Marin's spade struck something hard. She dropped the tool and scraped with her fingers. A corner of canvas emerged, military green, frayed but intact. With steady hands, she pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked, wrapped in waterproof cloth, bound with the same kind of twine used in field kits. Marin laid it gently on the flat stone beside the trail. Ava hovered close, Scout still pressed against her shoulder. The pup was silent. So was Sentinel, as if both understood. This wasn't just a package, it was memory buried but not forgotten. Marin unwrapped it. Inside were 3 items. First, a folded set of tactical deployment maps, each marked with hand-drawn circles, timestamps, and initials. Second, a sealed envelope, brittle at the edges but dry inside. Her name was written on the front in thick black ink. To Marin, if you made it this far. She didn't open it yet. She couldn't. Her fingers lingered on the handwriting, trembling, not from fear but from something older. Grief that had learned to sit quietly in the background, now forced to stand. Then she lifted the 3rd item. A police badge, tarnished, cracked down the center like it had been stepped on or left to weather too long in the cold. The name engraved beneath the damage still shimmered faintly. Lieutenant R. Mendez. Ava's breath caught. "I know that name," she whispered. "He was in Gabriel's unit." Marin nodded slowly. Declared KIA 2 years before Callan went missing. No recovery. No explanation. She looked up at Sentinel. The old shepherd stared at the badge. His ears shifted forward slightly, not alarmed, but alert, recognizing something deeper than sight. "They're all connected," Ava murmured. "Mendez, Callan, Gabriel." "2 ghosts," Marin said softly. The words didn't echo. They landed, heavy, final. Marin finally slit open the envelope with her knife. Inside, a letter, written in rushed pen strokes, smudged in places, as if written in the rain. She began to read aloud. "Marin, if this reaches you, it means Row 77 remembered. I hoped he would. I tried to give him everything, location tags, memory loops, scent trails, but I wasn't sure. They tampered with too much. They're erasing us, piece by piece, 1 handler at a time, 1 K9 at a time. Mendez wasn't an accident. Gabriel's wrong turn, engineered. Me? I've got maybe 1 more move left, and I'm using it to bury truth where only trust will find it. They made these dogs into vaults, witnesses with teeth, but no one believed they could choose. That was their mistake. Sentinel, he chose. Finish what we couldn't. And if you find Ava, tell her he was always more than a dog. He was our memory." Marin stopped. Her voice broke, just once, then silence. Not from fear, but reverence. Ava sank to her knees beside Sentinel. "He brought this back to us." Sentinel didn't move, but his eyes met hers, and in them Ava saw not the past, but the burden of having carried it. The sky above the canopy shifted clouds pulling across the sun in slow silence. Shadows danced between the trees, and a breeze swept through the clearing, stirring the edges of the maps. Scout whimpered just once and pressed his nose into Ava's shoulder. She looked down at the badge in her hand, the cracked emblem glinting faintly in the light. 2 ghosts, and 1 witness who refused to forget. The engine's hum was the only sound filling the car, low, steady, and just enough to muffle the thoughts clanging inside Ava's head. She sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting gently on Scout's small back, the other gripping the folded letter from Callan. The trees blurred past the windows, pine after pine in a green and gray loop. Sentinel lay curled in the back, eyes half-lidded, but not asleep. Never asleep. Marin drove with a tension Ava hadn't noticed before. Shoulders tighter, jaw set, one eye constantly checking the rearview mirror. It wasn't until they hit the 4th bend of the old logging road that Marin spoke. "We've had company since the fork," she said flatly. Ava twisted in her seat. Behind them, at a subtle but precise distance, a dark SUV trailed the curve of the road. No headlights, no front plate. "I didn't hear it," Ava said. "You weren't supposed to." They didn't stop, didn't slow. Marin adjusted her grip and took the next turn faster than the last, tires skimming gravel like chalk across stone. But the SUV didn't close in, didn't back off either. It just stayed, like a shadow pretending to be nothing more than coincidence. "They're not interested in confrontation," Marin muttered. "Not yet." Ava felt the weight of the badge in her coat pocket, the one that bore Mendez's name, and the envelope pressed against her ribs. Her fingers curled instinctively around Scout, who gave a soft huff, sensing her unease. "What do they want?" "To make sure we know they know," Marin said. Then, with quiet venom, "Classic psychological push. They won't hit hard until they've made you question whether they even exist." The SUV peeled off just before the outskirts of town, veering down a dirt side road that looked like it hadn't seen traffic in months. No turn signal, no windows rolled down, just gone like mist retreating into trees. Marin didn't chase, didn't comment. She just drove straight back to Ava's. The sun was beginning to lower behind the hills when they arrived. Shadows stretched across the gravel drive, long and skeletal. Sentinel stepped out of the back without command, eyes scanning the tree line before moving toward the porch. His posture was low, not aggressive but alert. Guard mode. Marin was the first to notice. She froze, one boot halfway to the steps. Ava followed her gaze. There, tucked carefully between the first and second steps, was a single sheet of paper. Crisp, unfolded, untouched by wind or moisture. Ava's stomach dropped before she even picked it up. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't threatening. It was a photograph. Black and white. Grainy but clear. The image, Sentinel, standing alone at her gate. From 2 nights ago. Her hand trembled. Not from fear, but from realization. "They were watching," she whispered. "From the beginning." Marin stepped closer, eyes scanning the corners of the trees, then the rooftops. No drone hum, no glint of lenses. Whoever had been there, they weren't amateurs. "Not just watching," she said. "They knew he'd come here. Maybe even sent him." Ava felt Sentinel brush past her leg, silent as breath. He didn't growl, didn't pace. He sat at the base of the steps, eyes fixed on the forest beyond. Unmoving, unbothered, unsurprised. He'd known, too. Inside the house, Ava laid the photo on the kitchen table beside the badge, the maps, and the now open letter. A story was forming in pieces, a trail retraced in reverse, and in the center of it all, one dog, one witness, still carrying a memory that someone was willing to kill to bury again. Ava looked through the window. Sentinel hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His message was clear. They're watching, but I'm still here. The drive to Marin's safe house was made in silence, except for the soft whir of tires along the narrow gravel road, one too forgotten for a GPS to register. Sentinel rode in the back seat, his body swaying slightly with every bend, ears perked, alert despite the stillness. Scout lay curled against Ava's chest, breathing slow, sensing this place was different, remote, buried, like something someone wanted to forget. Marin's off-grid archive wasn't what Ava expected. It wasn't a bunker, or a steel vault, or a dim warehouse lined with file cabinets. It was a converted tool shed behind a burned-out farmhouse, its roof patched in metal scraps, its lock disguised behind a rusted mailbox door. Ivy clung to the edges, and the surrounding woods formed a dense wall of pine that muffled the world. Marin didn't speak as she unlocked it. The door creaked open, revealing a room colder than outside, lined with sealed plastic bins, waterproof crates, and old military hard cases marked discarded and disavowed. A single bulb hummed above. "This is everything they erased," Marin muttered. "Or tried to." She knelt beside a gray footlocker and entered a 6-digit code into a keypad hidden beneath the handle. A click. A hiss. The lid rose. Inside, sealed folders, USB sticks, stacks of printed mission logs, some yellowed with age, some still bearing the scent of scorched ink. She worked methodically, like someone who knew how each document was categorized, not by number, but by loss. Then she found it. A red folder labeled Op Black Hold, Incursion, K9 Cipher Unit, Handler Cluster B, C, G, Callan, G. Quinn, R. Mendez. Ava froze. Gabriel, Callan, Mendez, all listed in the same file, same date, same coordinates, same end. Marin laid the folder open across a cleared workbench. She pulled out a mission sheet operation. Cross Pine. Date, 5 years ago. Location, disputed zone outside federal jurisdiction. Status, containment failed. Data exfil incomplete. But in the margins, scribbled in ink, someone had written, Exfil blocked, orders intercepted, Handler Quinn rerouted, do not inform. Marin tapped the note. That's not military code. That's someone playing God. Ava leaned in, her breath shallow. Next came an overlay map of the team's location splits. Callan and Mendez sent one direction, Gabriel isolated on another route. Time stamps confirmed it. He wasn't just separated. He was cut off. Deliberately. Ava felt the world tilt. He wasn't supposed to survive, she whispered. No, Marin said flatly. He was the scapegoat. The trail to bury the rest. There was more. A photo-grainy surveillance showed a familiar figure walking alongside Sentinel, labeled K9RO77. The note beneath, asset rerouted for future retrieval, experimental memory payload presumed intact. Ava's voice cracked. He was cargo, not a partner, not even a being. They turned your husband's team into a network of memory mules, Marin said. then burned them to erase what they carried. And Gabriel never knew. "No," Marin said, her voice harder now, "but someone very high up did." The light flickered once. The cold in the shed felt deeper now, like the walls themselves had started listening. Scout whimpered gently. Ava pressed her hand to her chest, suddenly needing to feel the weight of Gabriel's dog tags under her sweater. She hadn't taken them off in years, but now they burned like guilt. Sentinel shifted beside her. Not a sound, but he looked up. And for the first time, Ava saw it. Something behind those eyes. Not just memory, not just training. Recognition of names, of faces, of betrayals too large for a leash to restrain. She reached for his fur, fingers threading into it like roots needing soil. "We weren't just his home," she whispered. "We were the last place they couldn't rewrite." Marin sealed the folder again, locking it back into the gray case. "This war didn't end," she said. "It just went quiet." And somewhere, deep inside the archive, the echo of that silence felt louder than any bullet. The first limp was almost imperceptible. Ava noticed it as they returned from the archive, just before reaching the edge of the gravel driveway. Sentinel paused, shifted his weight, then stepped forward with a barely-there hesitation in his gait. She thought it might have been the cold or the long day. But when he climbed the porch steps and stopped again, that hesitation turned to strain. He winced. She dropped to her knees beside him without a word. "Easy, boy," she whispered, brushing her fingers gently along his shoulder, then down his leg. No visible wound, no blood, but something wasn't right. Scout, sensing the shift, paced in quiet circles, ears flattened, tail tucked. Marin, still at the car, caught Ava's glance and came forward. "What is it?" "He's hurt," Ava said softly, still probing the fur along Sentinel's neck. "But there's no cut, no abrasion." Her hand froze. There, just beneath his collar, something solid, rectangular, embedded. She unclasped the collar carefully, pulling it back to reveal a small metallic nub no bigger than a fingernail tucked deep into the fold of skin at the base of his neck. It blinked once. Red. Faint, but rhythmic. Not a wound, not a scar. A transmitter. Ava's stomach twisted. "That's not a chip for identification." Marin dropped to her haunches beside her. Her eyes narrowed. "That's a locator beacon." "How long has it been there?" Ava asked, already knowing the answer. Marin didn't respond. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a thin knife and a small magnetized field tool standard issue for field agents. She pressed the blade flat against the skin, not cutting, but tracing along the edge. Sentinel didn't flinch, didn't growl. He only looked at Ava, those deep eyes still calm, still waiting, as if he'd known this moment would come. "Hold him," Marin said. It took only seconds to dislodge it. A faint hiss of static accompanied the removal, like a wire exhaling its last breath. Marin dropped the device into a thermoplastic pouch and sealed it tight. She didn't speak, just stood, walked back toward the gravel, pulled out a collapsible hammer from the car trunk, and smashed it. Again and again, until the blinking light cracked, then went dark. Ava sat beside Sentinel, her hands resting in the fur along his shoulders. His body trembled not from pain, but from release, as if something ancient had uncoiled inside him, some weight that had never belonged there to begin with. Scout came close, nestling into his side. Ava leaned her head against Sentinel's. "You've been followed this whole time, haven't you?" A pause. A breath. She answered herself. Of course you have. Marin returned, breathing hard. Signal's dead. If they were watching in real time, it's going to trigger a silence flag. We'll have to move in the next 48. They tagged him like he was property, Ava said bitterly. Like he wasn't even a being, Marin offered. A memory, Ava whispered. Marin looked over. What? Ava stared at the spot where the chip had been. They didn't put that in for tracking him. They put it in to track what he knows, what he remembers. His brain is storing something, Marin said, connecting the dots. Not just behavior or training, data. And every step he's taken toward me was watched, Ava added, her voice breaking. Even his silence wasn't his own. They sat together on the steps as night fell, the porch light casting long shadows over the gravel drive. Scout was curled into Sentinel's flank, and for the first time, Sentinel seemed older, still dignified, still vigilant, but older, worn, like a soldier who had walked too long carrying things no one else could see. Ava reached forward, running her fingers through the fur where the chip had been. You carried it all this way, she said, her voice barely more than a breath. But now it's done. Sentinel didn't look back, but his tail moved just once, a slow sweep across the porch floor. A signal, not of surrender, but of acknowledgement. And from somewhere deep in the woods, a night bird cried sharp and sudden, not warning, not fear, just witness. Because even the trees were beginning to understand. This dog was never lost. He was delivering something no one else dared carry. The cabin was silent except for the soft hum of the laptop cooling fan and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Outside, the forest held its breath. Inside, the world Ava thought she understood unraveled line by line. Marin leaned over the table, her brows furrowed as she decrypted one final folder on the recovered drive. The same drive that had nearly fried Gabriel's old laptop an hour ago from the sheer security layering. Sentinel lay nearby, chest rising slow and steady, his head resting between his paws, still but alert. Ava sat beside him, one hand on his fur, the other gripping the edge of the table as if letting go would mean tumbling off a ledge she hadn't seen coming. A sharp click echoed from the speakers. The screen flickered once, then displayed a single black window. White text blinked in the corner. Classified, Core Witness, HO-77. The cursor moved, and then access granted. Marin sat up straighter. Here we go. The first file was a series of coded entries, each time stamped, marked with agency insignias Ava didn't recognize, some military, others civilian, a few completely redacted. Each entry included coordinates, handler names, and something labeled Imprint Engram Sync. What does that mean? Ava asked quietly. Engrams are cognitive imprints, Marin replied, scanning fast. Like pieces of memory, emotion-triggered storage, usually theoretical. But here, they built it. Another screen loaded. Grayscale videos, dogs in open rooms, tethered to biometric sensors, commands issued in flat voices, stimuli applied, heat, shock, hunger, sound, light and reactions catalogued. Some dogs cried, some didn't. Sentinel was in the last video, not barking, not resisting, just remembering. Marin opened a subfolder labeled Operation Echo Vault. Inside, a file titled Core Witness, RHO-77. She clicked. A dossier unfolded across the screen, line after line of documentation. Ava's breath caught as the truth began to bloom like bruises under skin. Subject RHO 77, K9, age 3Y4M at first imprint. Handler, Lieutenant D. Callan. Designation, Vault Capable. Transfer mode, Biological Non-Extractive. Purpose, Mobile Witness Encoding. What is this? Ava whispered. It's not just that he was trained to observe, Marin murmured, voice brittle. He was made to carry what humans couldn't. A line further down read, Memory type, classified incident footage, audio logs, death records, erased field data, handler emotion sync. Ava leaned forward, scrolling slowly until she reached the final page. A protocol entry, red-lettered. Unit RHO 77, not to be retrieved post-mission if compromised. Exposure risks systemic liability. Designate as loss. Terminate if found. Ava's hands shook. They knew he'd come back. They knew what he had. They didn't plan for him to survive, Marin said. They never do. There was silence then, a long one. Ava stood slowly and walked to Sentinel, who hadn't moved. She knelt beside him, brushed her fingers under his chin. He raised his eyes to meet hers, unwavering, deep, still waiting, still remembering. You were never just a dog, she whispered. You were a witness, a carrier of truth. Her voice cracked. You weren't supposed to come home. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from a sorrow she didn't have words for. It wasn't grief for Gabriel anymore. It was grief for what he must have known but never said, for what Sentinel had carried alone, for the weight no one had shared with him. Until now. Marin turned off the screen. If we publish this, there's no going back. Ava didn't turn around. He came back anyway, she said, even after they told him not to, even after they tried to erase him. He came back. She finally looked at Marin. And we owe him the truth. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying the kind of silence that had nothing to do with peace. Inside, a decision had been made. He wasn't a weapon. He was a living archive of everything they tried to bury. And the world was about to remember him. The drive took them past the limits of cell service, through winding back roads bordered by birch and long-forgotten farmland. Sentinel lay curled in the back seat, his eyes flickering open at every curve in the road but never rising. Scout dozed in Ava's lap, lulled by the motion and the quiet. Marin checked the printed directions again. It's up ahead. Third mailbox after the rusted tractor. Ava glanced at her. And you're sure he'll talk? Marin hesitated. Silas Kemp doesn't talk to many people, but he owes Callan. And if anyone understands what Sentinel is, it's him. The mailbox was nearly collapsed, its red flag hanging by a single bolt. A narrow gravel path led to a cottage that looked like it had surrendered to nature decades ago. Moss covered the shingles. The porch sagged, but smoke curled from the chimney. And on the porch sat a man who looked like he'd never left it. Silas Kemp, white beard, sun-damaged skin, a parka 2 sizes too big. His eyes were the only sharp thing left blue-gray and unblinking as he watched them park and approach. He didn't speak until they were close enough to hear his breath. You brought him back, he rasped. The vault dog. Inside, the house smelled of pine and machine oil. Books lined the walls. Notes, Diagrams, faded military charts lay scattered across a long wooden table. Sentinel padded in behind Ava, stopping halfway between the threshold and the hearth, like muscle memory knew this place once held orders. Silas watched him. "He doesn't recognize me," he said, not with disappointment, but awe. "But I remember him, K9 or 077. I signed his neural stability eval myself." Ava stood frozen. "Then you know what they did to him?" "I know what they tried," Silas said quietly, easing into a chair. "But he did something they never planned for." He looked at Sentinel now lying down, facing the fire, eyes alert, but calm. He remembered on his own. Marin stepped forward. "You were part of Project Echo Vault." Silas nodded once. "My sin and my sentence." He pulled a file from the desk drawer, handwritten, yellowed, edges curled from time. Inside were diagrams of canine neural maps, implant modules, hormone spikes. One page had a name written at the top, Callan D. Below it, authorization signature, G. Quinn. Ava stared. "Gabriel?" Silas nodded solemnly. "Your husband didn't just volunteer. He co-signed the protocol's final stage." Ava staggered back, like the floor had shifted. "He wanted to shut it down," Silas added, "not enable it. He and Callan knew they were being used, so they programmed Row 77 to carry everything, data, memory, names. If they didn't make it, the dog would." Ava looked at Sentinel. "He's been carrying their story this whole time." Silas met her eyes. More than their story, their choice. Scout, now awake, sniffed around the room. He paused beside a dusty box and pawed it open. Inside, an old patch, frayed at the edges. Ava picked it up. It read, "Echo Vault Division, what you bury, he remembers." Silas gave a faint smile. "We thought we were building memory tools, but what we created was something with a conscience." Marin asked the question none of them had yet voiced aloud. "Is Sentinel the last?" Silas didn't hesitate. "Yes. The others broke. Some forgot, some never came back. But this one—" He nodded toward the old shepherd, who now rose and walked slowly to the center of the room. "This one didn't forget. He chose not to." The fire crackled softly. Ava crouched beside Sentinel, her fingers brushing his fur. He leaned into her just slightly. Not obedience, something else. Something closer to choice. Tears welled in her eyes, quiet and uninvited. "You carried them all the way home," she whispered. "And you didn't even ask for a door to be opened." Silas placed a folded paper on the table. "These are the last coordinates Callan stored in the dog's memory. He must have sent them just before going dark. I think he wanted you to find what they never could." Marin took the paper and looked up. "Then we follow the path they left." Ava stood, brushing her hand over Sentinel's head. "Not for closure," she said. "For witness." Outside, the sun dipped behind the pines, casting the world in amber. And inside that quiet house, a forgotten soldier named Row 77 stood once more, not as a weapon, but as a memory that refused to die. The forest had changed since the last time someone walked this path, not in shape, but in spirit. What had once been a controlled pine growth now felt haunted. Trees leaned toward each other like sentinels, whispering secrets, and the dirt trail was interrupted by clusters of ash-colored stone and fallen limbs charred black by old fire. Ava led quietly, the printed coordinates shaking slightly in her hands. Sentinel walked beside her, his gait steady but cautious. Marin followed behind with Scout cradled to her chest, the pup oddly still, as if he too sensed the air had thickened with memory. The sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows that crept like fingers across the forest floor. "There," Marin whispered, pointing ahead. A single pine stood at the clearing's edge, burned down the middle, its bark scorched, limbs skeletal, and at its base a dip in the earth, not a grave in the traditional sense, but a place where something had once been laid and covered gently, not buried deep. Sentinel stopped cold. His nose touched the soil once, twice. Then he sat, unmoving, watching, guarding. Ava dropped to her knees. The ground here wasn't like the others. No headstone, no marker. Just a strange reverence in the arrangement, like someone had known this wouldn't be found by strangers. She reached down, brushing loose soil with her fingers, a hint of fabric, then metal. A badge, dulled by time but intact, gleamed against her palm. Lieutenant D. Callan. She stared at it, her breath caught between disbelief and something too sacred for language. Marin knelt beside her, eyes trained on the disturbed patch of earth now fully exposed. "He wasn't dumped," Marin said softly. "He was placed. With care." Ava nodded slowly. "Like a friend saying goodbye." They continued, gently uncovering the site. Bones, yes, but not alone. Folded beneath the rib cage was a torn strip of navy blue uniform. Sewn into it was a name tag, half charred, D. Callan. Next to the bones lay an old wristwatch, the hands frozen at 0217. Beneath it, tucked into the fabric folds, a single dog tag etched with both Callan's name and Gabriel's. Marin's voice cracked. "He carried this? Or was given it before the end?" Ava whispered. For a moment, no one moved. Even Scout was silent. The only sound came from Sentinel, who stepped forward, laid down fully beside the grave, and rested his head near where the chest would have been. He didn't whimper. He didn't cry. He just stayed still, as if something had finally caught up to him. Ava took the badge in both hands, her fingers trembling. "He died keeping the promise," she said. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to, because everything around them, the stillness of the air, the hush of the trees, the way the light broke through the canopy like a quiet benediction, spoke for her. Marin stood and looked around. Whoever did this, they knew this wasn't just a corpse. They honored him, even in hiding. Ava's voice was hoarse. Or they loved him. She pulled a small notebook from her jacket, the one she had started after the video from Callan, after the first badge, after she realized the world had tried to forget something that refused to stay buried. She turned to a blank page and wrote with shaking hands, "Here lies a man the world never named a hero, but a dog came back for him anyway." As they packed up the few things that remained, Ava wrapped the badge in the cloth from the grave and placed it in her chest pocket, over her heart. Sentinel rose slowly. The way he looked at the soil now wasn't grief. It was permission, a passing of something sacred. Back at the tree line, Marin whispered, "We should go, before the light fades." But Ava lingered a moment longer, one last look, one final breath drawn from this place. She reached down and placed a single pine cone on the grave, not as a marker, but a promise. "To the one who never stopped carrying them," she murmured. Sentinel turned, just once, to look back. And then they left the grave unnamed, but not forgotten. The storm rolled in just after dusk, quiet at first, like a whisper sliding down the mountain. But by nightfall the wind had turned bold, sweeping through the eaves of the cottage with long howling moans. It rattled the shutters like restless ghosts looking for a way back in. Ava stood at the window, one hand resting on the frame, the other wrapped around a mug long gone cold. Her gaze wasn't on the rain or the trees bending beneath it, it was on them. Sentinel lay curled near the hearth, his body a dark silhouette against the dim orange firelight. His breathing was even but slow, the rhythm of a creature not resting, but enduring. And beside him, tucked tightly against his chest, was Scout. The little pup had refused the bed Ava made for him that night. He'd paced the living room, soft whines barely audible above the wind, until finally, without hesitation, he walked to Sentinel, placed his small head just beneath the older dog's chin, and pressed his body there. It wasn't just comfort. It was recognition. It was understanding. It was a passing of something wordless. Ava lowered herself to the floor, sitting a few feet away. She didn't want to intrude. There was something sacred about the way they lay Scout's ears twitching at every thunderclap, yet his body unmoving. Sentinel didn't stir. His eyes were half-lidded, not with sleep, but something far older. Resignation, perhaps. Or maybe relief. The wind grew stronger, blowing in sideways sheets. The house creaked in places Ava never noticed before. But still, the two dogs didn't move. And then it happened. Sentinel closed his eyes. Not like before, when he'd napped in short bursts, ears half alert, a warrior never fully at ease. No, this time it was different. His breathing slowed. His brow softened. His body always held with some tension, as if one more command might come at any second, relaxed. Fully. Finally. Ava's breath caught. She had never seen him like this. Not in all the days he stood watch at her porch, not in the moments he patrolled the tree line, not even when Scout first arrived in that soaked bundle of cloth. This was not the posture of a soldier awaiting orders. This was peace. And it wasn't given. It was earned. Scout shifted slightly, curling closer. His small body rose and fell in sync with Sentinel's, and his nose nestled beneath the older dog's neck fur. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the thunder rolled deeper into the valley, and the rain slowed to a hush, like hands brushing gently across a drum. Ava leaned forward, her voice barely above the flicker of the flame. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "Even before we did." The pup didn't respond, but she didn't need him to. Somewhere in that stillness, in the way Scout had found Sentinel's chest and laid his head there as if to listen to a fading echo, there was truth. That even in silence, something had been passed on. Memory. Instinct. Trust. Hours passed. The storm waned, until all that remained was the drip of rain from the gutters and the warmth of coals behind the grate. Ava dozed briefly, waking to the soft sound of Sentinel's breathing beside her. He hadn't moved. Neither had Scout. And somehow, that stillness felt louder than thunder. At dawn, when Ava stepped outside to greet the pale light curling over the hills, she paused. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. The storm had washed the world clean, but inside, something remained. Not just in the scent of fur or the shallow paw prints on the hearthrug, but in the way Scout looked up at her when she returned, and in the way Sentinel, eyes open again, watched her with none of his usual alertness, just the slow, warm knowing of one who had finally laid something down. She didn't say a word. Instead, she sat beside them, and the three of them listened to the silence together. It was close to midnight when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, measured, metallic. Not the clumsy thud of a neighbor or the hesitant tap of a lost traveler, but something rehearsed, mechanical. Intentional? Ava froze, her hand mid-reach for a mug in the kitchen. Marin looked up from the files she'd been cross-referencing at the table. Sentinel, lying by the hearth, lifted his head ears erect, body still. Scout stirred slightly, sensing the shift in the room's air, but didn't bark. Ava moved to the door slowly, not opening it, just listening. Another knock. Marin rose silently and stepped into the shadows, hand slipping a small recording device from her jacket and pressing it to life. She gave Ava a nod. Ava unlocked the door but kept the chain latched. The crack she opened was narrow. Outside stood a man in a black windbreaker, no badge, no insignia, just a clipped haircut, clean boots, and a face too blank to trust. Rain pattered softly around him, the mist from the trees behind catching light like fog off a barrel. "Ms. Quinn?" the man asked. His voice was polite, too polite. "Who's asking?" "Special Officer Camden, Department of Tactical Memory Assets." Marin's brows lifted. She mouthed silently, "That's not a real division." "I don't know what that means," Ava replied, her voice low. The man tilted his head slightly. "We're here for the German Shepherd in your possession. Asset code Row 77. He's classified property. We'd prefer this not become a formal retrieval." Ava's breath caught in her chest. Sentinel was on his feet now, standing directly behind her like a silent shadow. His body was calm, but his eyes, those deep, dark eyes, had changed. Watching, calculating. "Asset?" Ava repeated, her voice bitter. The man took a step forward. "Ms. Quinn, the K9 currently in your residence is a biologically enhanced military prototype. He contains encrypted mission data, experimental neural conditioning, and classified material. His presence here constitutes a breach." Ava didn't blink. "He walked to my gate. He chose to stay. That doesn't sound like a prototype to me." "That doesn't matter. Legally, he was never decommissioned, which means he's government property." Behind the door, Marin turned the recorder toward the man, her hand steady, her voice cut in sharp. "Under what authorization? You have no ID, no warrant, and no chain of custody document. That dog is a living being, and you're referring to him like a laptop." Camden's eyes flicked toward the voice. "And you are?" "Marin Reyes, former Internal Affairs. Badge number 2043, before your people erased my clearance." A flicker of recognition passed over his face. He straightened. "This doesn't have to be hostile," he said. "I'm just following retrieval protocol." Ava's hand clenched tighter around the doorframe. Her voice was low but carried something deeper than threat. "He's not a device. He's someone's memory." Camden hesitated, just for a second. Then he exhaled. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," Ava said, unclipping the chain and meeting his eyes through the now wide door. "You're trying to erase something that remembers more than you ever will." Sentinel stood beside her now, tall, unmoving, not barking, not growling, just present and undeniable. Camden looked at the dog. Something about that gaze gave him pause. "You'll hear from us again," he said. He turned without another word, boots crunching on wet gravel as he walked back toward the tree line. There was no car, no sound of an engine. He disappeared into the fog like he was never there. Ava shut the door slowly. Inside, Scout pressed against her ankle. Marin clicked off the recorder and whispered, "They know he's awake." "No," Ava said softly, eyes locked on Sentinel, who had returned to the window like a soldier returning to post. "They know he remembers." It happened so fast that the night itself didn't have time to scream. Ava had only stepped outside to reset the power switch. The storm had knocked it out again, typical for this part of the woods. Sentinel had followed as he always did, walking just a step behind her, his presence more habit than protection now. Or so she thought. The first sound wasn't a shot. It was the soft crack of a twig, a breath in the dark. Then came the whimper, a muted pop, barely louder than the thunder rolling overhead. But enough. Sentinel staggered. Ava turned in time to see him drop to his side, legs twitching violently as something hissed near his shoulder. Not blood. Smoke. "No, no, Sentinel!" She dropped beside him, heart pounding so loudly she couldn't hear the storm anymore. His breath came in short, spasmodic bursts. Not pain. Shock. System failure. Marin rushed out from the cabin, a flashlight already in hand, and a firearm drawn from the holster she hadn't worn in years. Her instincts moved faster than her questions. "Inside, get him inside now!" They dragged Sentinel into the living room, the pup barking shrilly, trying to reach him. Ava held Sentinel's massive head in her lap, fingers trembling as she stroked between his ears, whispering, "I've got you. I've got you. Please stay." Marin peeled back fur slick with rain and mud near his right shoulder. "They weren't trying to kill him," she said. "They were targeting something." She found it under the scar tissue, deep, precise, and unnaturally cool to the touch. Ava turned away and grabbed the emergency kit Gabriel used to keep for Scout's minor injuries. Marin didn't wait. Her blade was already out. "You sure?" Ava asked, breath breaking. "If I don't take it out now, it'll do what it was designed to do, bleed the data and burn the rest." With a single practiced motion, Marin made the incision. Sentinel didn't yelp, didn't move, only his eyes flickered open for a moment, then fell shut again. Ava held her breath. What came out wasn't a bullet, but something far worse. A black capsule no larger than a dime, slick with blood and ringed in glassy wiring. It pulsed faintly with internal light, like a heartbeat. "Oh my God," Marin whispered. "This wasn't a tracker. It's a live cache." Ava's eyes met hers. "You mean the second memory vault?" Marin nodded. "Encrypted, organic, buried in live tissue so it couldn't be scanned without harming him." Scout whined beside them, pawing gently at Sentinel's unmoving side. Ava reached down, grabbing a towel to slow the bleeding, her voice cracking with every word. He didn't stop being a soldier, even when they tried to erase him. Marin examined the casing under a UV light. "There's something else here. See that imprint? Serial code, batch number. This isn't field issue. This was installed during Blackhold's experimental phase." Ava clenched her jaw. He was carrying a ticking time capsule, and they just tried to detonate it without a trace. The wind howled outside like it knew. Marin moved quickly to secure the capsule in a lead-lined box she retrieved from her car. "We need to move him," she said. "Now." There's no telling if they'll try again, and if they realize they didn't recover the cache. "No," Ava said. Her hand rested on Sentinel's side. "He came to me once. He'll come back again. We just need to help him hold on." She turned toward Scout, now curled tightly against Sentinel's chest. "Stay with him," she whispered. Scout didn't move, didn't bark, just pressed in closer, like instinct told him this wasn't just about one dog's survival, but the preservation of something none of them fully understood yet. The clinic didn't have a sign, just a rusted mailbox, a dented green door, and a porch light that flickered like it was always on the verge of burning out. But Marin had known where to find it. She always did. Off-record, out-of-sight places were her domain. The vet, Dr. Ellis Park, opened the back door without a word. One look at Sentinel, unconscious but breathing, and he stepped aside, already pulling on gloves. They moved fast. No forms, no questions, only the quiet urgency of people who understood that paperwork sometimes killed faster than bullets. Inside, the operating table was clean but worn. The tools sharp but mismatched, and the vet's hands steady as stone. "He's lost a lot of blood," Dr. Park muttered, checking vitals, hooking up an IV. "But it's not the blood I'm worried about. It's the trauma pattern. This isn't a normal injury." He glanced up at Ava. "Where did you say he came from?" "I didn't," Ava replied, voice tight. Scout lay curled on a blanket in the corner, eyes locked on the table. He hadn't made a sound since they arrived. Ava sat beside him, her knees against her chest, arms wrapped tight. She'd stopped shaking, but only because she had nothing left to shake loose. Marin stood watch by the window, pistol resting on the sill like a silent vow. 2 hours in, Dr. Park said nothing. 3 hours in, he whispered, "Jesus." He lifted the surgical light and leaned in, carefully cleaning around the scar tissue on Sentinel's spine. "You're going to want to see this." Ava hesitated, then moved closer. The vet pointed to a faint ridge beneath the skin. "See this pattern? Electrical burns. Old, faded, not accidental. These were layered over time, designed to stimulate response conditioning." "Like shock training?" Ava asked, the words bitter in her mouth. "More than that. This was precision work. Someone was teaching him to override pain, rewire instinct. I've only seen this once before on military dogs who were pushed too far, too fast." He pulled back slightly, voice quiet now. This dog wasn't just trained for war. He was sculpted by it. Ava reached for Sentinel's paw. It twitched under her touch. He was still fighting, still trying. Her throat clenched. What kind of world makes something like that and then throws him away? Dr. Park didn't answer. He just kept working. By dawn, the worst had passed. Sentinel lay wrapped in a clean blanket, oxygen gently hissing at his side. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm that no longer sounded like war drums, just breathing. Raw, labored, but alive. Dr. Park wiped his hands and sank into a chair. "He'll make it," he said. "But don't expect a miracle recovery. Dogs like him don't just heal. They remember." Ava looked up, eyes glassy. "That's why he came back. He never stopped remembering." Marin stepped closer, unfolding the blood-stained towel that had once held the data capsule. "He survived more than what they gave him," she murmured. "He survived despite it." Ava nodded slowly, brushing a strand of fur from Sentinel's face. "Because someone had to. Someone had to carry it all." Scout padded over and nestled beside his mentor, pressing his small frame into Sentinel's side. The older dog didn't move, but a faint flick of his tail answered in silence. In that tiny clinic, far from the noise of sirens or headlines, no medals were handed out. No flags were folded, but a soldier still breathed. A memory still pulsed. And a war dog who was never meant to come home had chosen to live anyway. The sun hadn't risen yet. But inside Ava's study, the world was already unraveling. The house, once full of grief's silence, now hummed with urgency. The walls seemed to lean inward, as if holding their breath. Marin sat at Gabriel's old desk, hunched over a patched-together rig of hardware, his laptop, an encrypted decoder from her archive, and a handheld reader meant for field operatives. The microchip, freshly extracted from beneath Sentinel's scarred shoulder, blinked faint blue in a reader cradle. Ava stood behind her, arms crossed tight, clutching a ceramic mug that had gone cold hours ago. Scout lay curled near Sentinel, who now rested on a folded blanket beside the fireplace. His breathing was steady, deep, but his eyes were half-lidded, as though part of him was still marching, still guarding. A light on the screen turned green. Marin's fingers stopped. "It's in," she said, her voice a notch above a whisper. Ava leaned in. The screen flickered. Lines of code poured down like rain dents, indecipherable to the untrained eye. Then came folders, labeled by year, operation, handler, blood type, GPS coordinates. But then one line stilled Ava's breath. Core, RHO 77, Visual Archive. Marin clicked. The footage wasn't clean. It was raw, captured through Sentinel's ocular interface, likely augmented by his tactical collar at the time. There was grain, static, but enough clarity to tell the truth. They watched mission after mission, rural forests, burned compounds, concrete bunkers, Sentinel moving with lethal precision, human voices barking commands, gunfire, screams, then silence. A clip loaded slower than the rest. The timestamp was 5 years old. The screen opened to a flickering fire in a cave. Mud-streaked hands set the camera down on a rock. Then a face appeared. Callan. His face was hollowed, beard unkempt, uniform in tatters. But his voice, when he spoke, was clear, deliberate. "If this finds you," he began, staring straight into the lens, "then row 77 did what I asked." He blinked, glancing away as if trying to pull strength from some memory just out of reach. "We weren't supposed to survive Blackhold. Not me, not Gabriel, not the dogs. We were prototypes, tools to test how much memory a living being could carry, without breaking." He shifted slightly, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "Some of us broke anyway." He exhaled slowly. "But Sentinel didn't. Row 77 didn't. He remembered when I couldn't. He carried what I couldn't bear." The camera shook slightly as he leaned in. "There's a file called Delta Glass. Open it. Send it everywhere. If they bury this, more dogs will suffer. More names will vanish. And no one will know what we made them forget." Callan's voice cracked barely. "I tried to come back. I tried. But if this is all that's left of me, let it matter." A pause. Then a whisper, almost too soft to catch. "Tell them how we remembered." The video froze. The last frame. His eyes locked on the lens. Not afraid. Just tired. Ava stepped back, her throat closing. Marin sat stunned, jaw clenched. Neither spoke for a moment. Outside, dawn was bleeding slowly across the sky, graying the rain-slick windows, casting soft light over the worn badge on the desk. D. Callan. Sentinel shifted slightly in his sleep, a faint twitch in his paw, as if even now he was still running toward something. Ava knelt beside him, resting a hand over his rib cage. "He didn't just survive," she whispered. "He carried everything." Marin opened the folder labeled Delta Glass. Inside, surveillance logs, personnel IDs, classified kill orders, and a voice file titled Asset Containment Directive. The evidence wasn't just enough to bring down a project, it was enough to bring down the people who built it. Ava looked at Marin. "How fast can we leak it?" Marin gave a grim smile. "How many doors do you want to knock on?" Ava turned back to the screen. "All of them," she said. The files weren't sent to one place. They were scattered like seeds, like landmines. 7 different outlets, each chosen for a reason. Some were major newsrooms Ava had once edited for, back when her name still appeared in bylines. Others were independent watchdogs, digital sanctuaries for stories too dangerous to air through official channels. Marin worked fast, methodically, her fingers dancing across 3 separate keyboards. Each screen split, each connection bouncing through layers of proxy servers. A digital symphony of defiance. Ava stood at the window, Scout asleep against her ankle, Sentinel resting in the shadows just beyond the fireplace. The scent of rain hadn't left the walls, but tonight it didn't smell like grief. It smelled like something waiting to be named. "We go in 3, Marin said. Ava gave a slow nod. "Do it." Marin pressed enter. The first upload hit the feed of the Hollow Wire, a whistleblower collective known for leaking military irregularities. The headline was brutal and clean. "Bio-coded dog, the weapon they never expected to tell the truth." 2 minutes later, the second went live on Epic Signal, a fringe science outlet. Grainy footage of Callan's message paired with an internal memo titled Cognitive Transference in Combat K9 Units. Then another, a video on Veritas Channel showing Sentinel's mission footage, uncut, unflinching, undeniable. Gunfire, heat signatures, names, faces. By the 5th upload, it had begun. Twitter, Threads, Substack, Discord, then TikTok got it. A clip, just Callan's final line, "Tell them how we remembered," played over the slow zoom of Sentinel's tired, unblinking eyes. The hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Hashgosh, he remembers. Justice. For Colin. Sentinel, not stray. Operation, Black Hold. Let them come home. Ava sat on the edge of her sofa, breath shallow. Her inbox exploded. Her old editor messaged one line. "Is this real?" Another message. A widow. "I had a dog, just like him. They said she died in training." An anonymous source. "I have more documents. If you're not afraid, I'll send them." The truth didn't knock. It tore the door off the hinges. In the span of an hour, Sentinel's image had gone from anonymous to iconic. That first picture, his soaked fur in front of Ava's gate, moonlight lining his posture like armor, was now posted everywhere. He wasn't a stray. He was a sentinel. Marin clicked through her open feeds. They're picking it up. Every platform, every language. One headline read, "Ghost dogs of the military. Did the government turn living beings into black boxes?" Another simply said, "He waited at the gate." Ava leaned her head back, eyes glistening. They can't bury it this time. Outside, cars passed by without slowing. No black SUVs. No agents, just the wind curling through the pine trees like a breath exhaled after too long holding still. She turned toward Sentinel, who lifted his head not with alarm, but awareness. "You brought them all here," she whispered. Every voice that was silenced. From across the room, Marin added softly, "And now, every door hears it." The first night after the upload, Ava didn't sleep. Not out of fear, but anticipation. Expectation. Every creak in the hallway, every flicker of a headlight on the gravel road made her flinch. She kept the porch light off, and a hand close to the old revolver Gabriel once stored above the fireplace. But no one came. No black car. No men in suits. No knock at midnight. Just the silence. Not empty, but deliberate. A pause from a system stunned. Marin stayed up too, pacing like a soldier who'd survived ambushes but never aftermath. At dawn, she finally said, "Sometimes, when you pull the curtain too fast, they can't move." Ava looked at Sentinel, who sat by the window again, unblinking, his body no longer stiff with pain, but still with purpose. Even Scout had quieted, sensing the air had changed. By noon, the first headline broke. Federal agent Silas Roque arrested for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice. Roque, the man whose name had hovered like smoke through every file, every buried operation. They hadn't taken Sentinel. They'd taken him. And that wasn't all. Later that day, the letters started arriving. Some by email, some handwritten, smudged and scrawled like confessions too long held in the dark. Others were voice recordings, shaky, halting. "My husband was in that unit. They said he had a stroke in the field, but I saw the bruises. We trained dogs to respond to silence, to memory cues. One ran off during a test. They called her a failure. But she wasn't. She remembered. I was one of the handlers. They told us to erase them. We couldn't. I still remember row 77. He never forgot me." Some came from war widows like Ava. Some from vets who'd spent years wondering if the ghosts in their dreams were just trauma or warnings. What had once been whispers became a collective murmur, and the murmur grew legs. By the end of the week, the Hollow Wire hosted a full open-source database titled The Sentinel Files, Accounts from the Forgotten. Anyone could read, anyone could upload, and they did, hundreds of them. Photos of dogs with serial tattoos, maps with wiped-out trails, names of units that never made it into the record books. And amidst it all, a single image viral haunting quiet. Sentinel. Sitting in the rain outside Ava's gate. The caption underneath read, "He waited for someone to listen." Ava scrolled through the entries one night. Scout curled at her feet. Sentinel at his usual post. Not guarding, just present. There was a beauty in the stillness now. Not the dead weight of grief, but something else. The stillness of having survived. Of knowing the truth didn't belong to one person anymore. It belonged to all of them. To the ones who trained. To the ones who served. To the ones who waited by the door long after the war ended, ears perked for a voice they weren't sure they'd ever hear again. And to the ones who, like Sentinel, never stopped remembering. There was no knock, because there didn't need to be. The story had already entered, and it was never leaving again. The hill overlooked nothing remarkable, just rows of pine, a split-rail fence, and the hush of land untouched by road or wire. But to Ava, it was sacred. It was where the forgotten were finally remembered. They buried Callan at sunrise. No salutes, no rifles. Just a pine casket low to the earth, and two dogs who didn't need language to mourn. Scout had grown, no longer the shivering bundle once wrapped in a tattered uniform, but lean, steady, with eyes that held stories too old for his age. He lay beside the grave without command, his nose pressed to the turned soil, as if listening for the man who'd once carried him from ruin. Sentinel stood a few feet away, his bandaged side rising and falling with shallow breaths. The surgery had left him slower, scarred but not broken. Never broken. He watched like a sentry, head high despite the pain, eyes locked on the casket as though keeping vigil over a fallen brother. Marin said the words. A former officer turned, pariah turned whistleblower. Her voice didn't tremble when she read the letter Callan had left behind. It spoke of loyalty, of mistakes, of a promise never fulfilled until now. If they bury me, let it be with no rank, no lies, just a name. So they did. A simple headstone. One line, Lieutenant Declan Callan he didn't forget. Ava knelt by the grave, fingertips brushing the cool stone. The wind lifted her hair gently, like Gabriel used to do before heading out on patrol. She could almost hear him in that breeze. We didn't save them all, but we saved something. And maybe that something was enough. Scout whimpered once, a low, guttural sound. Not grief, but understanding. He pressed his head to Ava's thigh and let out a breath, long and soft. Sentinel didn't move for hours, even as the others drifted away, even as the clouds gathered again. He remained shoulders squared, gaze steady, like he was still on duty, like he knew this hill wasn't just a resting place but the final checkpoint, a return, from war, from silence, from the edge of being erased. When the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and without sound, Ava placed a small object at the foot of the grave, the worn badge engraved D. Callan, the one that started it all, not for symbolism, not for justice, just to bring it home. Behind her, Scout gave a quiet yawn and lay down again. And Sentinel? He finally sat, not because he was told, but because, for the first time in years, he knew there was nothing left to guard, only something left to remember. And in that stillness on that quiet hill beneath the pines, the past didn't vanish. It exhaled. It started with a crayon drawing. A crooked brown dog with kind eyes, standing beside a smaller one under a tall tree. At the bottom, written in blocky blue letters, Scout and Sentinel, Heroes. Signed, Ella, age 7. By the end of the week, the fence post near Callan's grave had become a gallery, taped and clipped by clothespins, fluttering in the wind like prayer flags, dozens of handmade tributes, some with stars, others with paw prints. One had a badge drawn entirely in glitter glue. Ava found herself stopping there every morning now. She didn't touch the pictures, just looked. They didn't come because they understood every detail. They came because they felt it. Because somehow, even without knowing the names or the classified missions or the horrors embedded in every scar on Sentinel's body, they knew what it meant to wait and what it meant to come back, sometimes broken, sometimes not at all. That morning, a pickup truck rattled down the gravel path, its tires familiar with the weight of time. The man who stepped out moved slowly, one hand pressed against his hip, as if pain had lived there for years. Retired Officer Ben Holloway, once a lieutenant in Gabriel's precinct, long since widowed, long since quiet. He didn't ask where to go. He just walked. To the grave under the pine tree, to the badge already laid there. He knelt painfully, reverently, and placed his own badge beside Callan's. Ava watched from the hill, fingers wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. She didn't interrupt. Neither did Sentinel. The old man stayed there a while, his head bowed, not in prayer, but in respect. Then he said only one thing, voice dry, but steady. He never stopped being one of us. And that was all. No speeches, no reporters, just that simple sentence and the gentle rustle of pine needles overhearing truth. That afternoon, a group of children from the local school came by with their teacher. They didn't say much either, just laid down a bouquet of wildflowers and patted Scout gently behind the ears. He wagged his tail once, shy but present. The teacher knelt beside one little boy and asked softly, "Do you know why we brought these here?" The boy nodded, serious. Because he remembered the people who got forgotten. Ava's throat tightened. Later that day, Sentinel did something he hadn't done in weeks. He walked the perimeter, slowly, deliberately, not patrolling, just remembering. With Scout at his side, tail brushing the tall grass, the two made one silent lap around the hill, then stopped together under the tree. They looked not at the grave, but beyond it, to the wide open stretch of land no one had claimed. Maybe they weren't guarding anymore. Maybe they were just holding space for the ones who hadn't come back, and for the ones who still might, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The wind had changed. It wasn't something Ava noticed at first, only that the air no longer carried the heaviness of old storms. The scent of pine came easier now, laced with the sweetness of distant blooming fields. Somewhere, something had shifted, not abruptly, quietly, like a breath finally exhaled after being held too long. It was a Thursday, late afternoon, with the sky somewhere between gold and gray. Ava had just finished folding a worn blanket Scout's favorite and placing it by the fireplace. She moved slower now, not out of age, but out of deliberate gratitude, the kind that comes only after survival. She opened the front door, more out of habit than expectation. And there he was, Sentinel, sitting upright on the porch as if no time had passed, as if he had always belonged to that exact moment, like a memory made flesh. His coat, though streaked with age, still shimmered faintly in the light. The scar beneath his left shoulder, where the chip had once pulsed, was barely visible now beneath the fur. But his eyes, they had not changed, still sharp, still endless, still watching something far greater than the world in front of him. Beside him, curled into a warm crescent of fur and tail, lay Scout, bigger now, stronger, no longer a pup, but not yet old. His ears twitched slightly, sensing her presence before even opening his eyes. Ava stood in the doorway, breath caught, not because she didn't expect them, but because she didn't realize how deeply she needed them to come back. And then she saw it, gleaming against the dark fur of Sentinel's neck. A small brass tag. She stepped forward, her knees unsure beneath her. She didn't reach for him. She simply knelt beside him, the way one does before a gravestone or a shrine or a truth too large to carry upright. She read the tag aloud, her voice catching on the edges. Sentinel, keeper of memory. The engraving was simple, unadorned, but it said everything. About the miles walked, the things buried, the silence endured. Scout nudged her hand, sensing her tears before they fell. And Sentinel didn't move. He didn't have to. He had come home, not to rest, but to witness. And maybe that was all he'd ever needed. A place where memory wasn't a burden, where the past wasn't something to escape, but something sacred enough to guard, quietly, at the foot of a wooden porch, beneath a sky that remembered everything. Ava sat beside him until the light dimmed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because some stories, when carried long enough, no longer need to be told out loud. They just need to be seen. It started with a single line, not typed, not dictated, but inked by hand on the first page of a weathered leather journal that had once belonged to Gabriel. The same one he used to jot patrol notes, dreams that never made it past the margins, and the occasional recipe Ava had taught him in the early days. Now the journal sat on her desk beneath the soft lamplight, its spine softened from time and grief. Ava's fingers hovered for a moment before pressing the pen down. They don't need words to be remembered. That was the beginning, not of a novel, not of a report, but of something quieter, truer, a record. One that would never be sold, never broadcast. It wasn't meant for the world's consumption. It was meant for the souls who still lingered in the static between silences. Those whose stories had been buried in red tape, marked classified, or simply erased. Ava paused, listening. Somewhere outside, the wind rustled through the pine. She could hear Sentinel breathing just beyond the open doorway, steadily, rhythmically, like the heartbeat of a sentinel who never truly left his post. Scout was curled by the fireplace, dreaming, his paws twitching in sleep, chasing some memory Ava would never fully grasp. And then she wrote. One page for Callan, his eyes, the way he laughed like he'd lived 2 lives already, the way he never called Gabriel by his rank, only by his name. The letter he left for Marin, hidden beneath moss. The ache of loyalty so fierce, it survived death. Another page for the unnamed. The agent whose badge they found beneath ash. The ranger who left a trail in North Marrow and never returned. The ones who waited for answers that never arrived. Mothers, brothers, partners, left to fill the silence with imagined endings. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough. Every name she inked was followed by a detail only a heart could remember. A way of standing. A whisper in the comms. The scent of pine oil on a uniform sleeve. Details small enough to be forgotten by history. Large enough to haunt it. Her handwriting slowed when she reached Gabriel's page. She didn't write a biography. She wrote about his hands, how they steadied hers the night before deployment, how they scratched behind Sentinel's ears in quiet understanding, how, even after death, they seemed to guide her through the storm, not with force, but with grace. By the time midnight came, she had filled 13 pages, and not once did she look up at the clock. She wasn't writing with time in mind. She was writing with memory, and memory, she had come to learn, didn't obey the rules of time. It obeyed love, grief, loyalty, and the strange sacred tether between humans and dogs who had seen things too great for words. The last thing she wrote that night wasn't a name. It was a sentence barely legible through the blur of tears. If they are forgotten, it is not because they were lost, only because we stopped listening. Ava closed the journal gently and placed it on the windowsill. And then, with only the hush of the wind and the soft crackle of fire as witness, she whispered, "I remember." And somewhere behind her, Sentinel lifted his head, as if he had heard every word. Scout never had a job description, no official badge, no certification. But he didn't need one. Somehow, without training or command, he understood his role. not as protector, not as warrior, but as something quieter, a vessel for memory, a witness for the unseen. It began with the War Widow Center. The receptionist had hesitated at first. Dogs weren't typically allowed past the lobby, but the moment Scout walked in, tail still, gaze calm, something shifted. An elderly woman seated in a corner, someone who hadn't spoken in weeks, simply reached for him without fear. He didn't lick, didn't bark. He just sat and stayed. She talked for an hour, not to Scout, really, but because of him. And when she finished, she touched his ear and whispered, "He used to sit like this. My James, after the war." Word spread, not fast, but far enough. Soon, Scout was visiting twice a week, then 3. No one asked Ava how he knew which rooms to pause in, or why he waited longer outside the doors of those who had lost children than those who had lost spouses. He just knew. And when he wasn't at the Widow Center, he wandered into the library, not to follow Ava, but to settle by the feet of anyone reading in silence. Sometimes next to veterans scanning old records, sometimes beside children tracing maps with their fingers. He became a fixture there, like a statue that moved when needed. He never fetched books, he never guarded shelves, he just listened. And people, they spoke, quietly, sometimes to each other, sometimes to themselves, sometimes just into the open space where Scout's breath steadied their own. Ava watched once from a distance, as Scout laid beneath a bench where a teenage boy sat curled, headphones in, tears tracking down his cheeks. The boy said nothing, but his hand never left Scout's fur. She never asked what the boy had lost. She didn't need to. That was Scout's way. He had never been taught to heal. He had been shown how to stay. And maybe that was enough. Once an old officer with silver-framed eyes leaned against a cane and looked down at Scout resting near the war memorial. He muttered, "That one's got Rook's patience," then added softer, "but a new soul." And that felt right. Because Scout didn't carry the past the way Sentinel had. He didn't bury it. He walked beside it, like a gentle reminder that some memories don't need to be repeated, just held by pause, by presence, by simply not leaving. Later that night, as Scout returned home and curled beside Sentinel on the porch, Ava placed a second tag beside Sentinel's on the wooden beam. It read, "Scout, Keeper of Listening." And in the fading dusk, the 2 dogs, old and young, breathed in sync. No alarms, no commands, only quiet. And quiet, Ava had learned, was often where the loudest truths lived. The morning came without fanfare. No golden sunrise, no bird song. Just a pale gray sky stretched over the pines, and the wind gentle, like someone remembering how to breathe after holding it too long. Ava stepped onto the porch in her old wool sweater, the one Gabriel had once said made her look like the mountains themselves. Quiet, constant, unshakable. She didn't expect anything. No mail, no visitors. Just the porch, the wood beneath her soles, and the familiar hush of a home that had learned to live with memory. That's when she saw him. Sentinel. Still. Not collapsed, not curled, just sitting. Exactly as he had so many mornings before, his back to the door, his eyes toward the trees, his body poised in that strange, dignified stillness that spoke of waiting without need, of watching without expectation. He was older now, grayer around the muzzle, his breathing shallow but steady. One ear twitched faintly at her steps, but he didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew it was her. Ava didn't speak. She sat beside him on the creaking step, close but not touching. Words would have been too loud for a moment like this. Instead, she let the silence do what it had always done between them. Carry meaning heavier than sound. Scout padded to the doorway behind them, sensing something in the air, but he didn't move closer. He understood. This wasn't his memory to hold. The wind came again, not cold, not sharp, just soft enough to pass between them like a voice older than time. Ava placed her hand gently on the wooden beam where both tags now hung. Sentinel, keeper of memory, scout, keeper of listening. And beneath them, carved faintly by her own hand over months of sleepless nights, the words, "They don't need words to be remembered." She glanced at Sentinel. His eyes were still open, still watching the tree line, still guarding. But there was something else in them now. Not alertness, not fatigue. Peace. A kind of peace that doesn't arrive with answers, but with the quiet acceptance that some stories, once carried long enough, learn to carry themselves. She exhaled. Not in sorrow, in gratitude. Because somehow through storm and shadow, through code names and gravestones, through secrets buried and truths finally spoken, Sentinel had kept his promise. He had brought them all home. Not to a place, but to understanding. And now, as the wind rustled the edges of the porch, Ava leaned her shoulder gently against his. And in that stillness, no medals, no music, no headlines, the story settled. Not ended, just remembered, just quietly, fully, there. In a world often too loud to hear what truly matters, sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones who wait, who watch, who simply stay, that remind us of the deepest truths. Sentinel was never just a dog. He was memory carved into fur, loyalty wrapped in silence, and love that refused to be forgotten. This story isn't just about a retired police dog or a grieving widow. It's about the bridges we build between past and present, between pain and healing. It's about how animals, especially German shepherds, with their fierce loyalty and unshakable hearts, can carry more than commands. They carry us. May we learn from Sentinel and Scout to listen more, to protect what matters, to remember those who served both the uniformed and the four-legged. And may we always honor the ones who carry memory, not with words, but with presence. Because sometimes all it takes is a silent guard on a front porch to teach us love never retires, loyalty never fades, and stories like these, they remember themselves. Cherish your animals, listen to their silence, and never underestimate the quiet that stays.